Today we're in conversation with Mark Dempster. He is a counselor that focuses on kind of addiction and substance abuse, amongst a few other things. He's also an author and has written 2 books, if that's correct, Mark.
Yeah, that's right. That's right, Nevada. Yeah.
And yeah, absolute pleasure to be joined, by you today. So, how you doing, first of all?
Yeah, good. Yeah, all good. Yeah, apart from the complications, it was a wee bit
Yeah.
stressful trying to get on, but yeah, apart from that, cool, good.
Awesome. So, Mark, I thought we could start with your background, if that's okay,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
kind of go right back to the beginning, almost maybe with your childhood, and just give us a little bit of insight as to where you grew up,
yeah,
and how your childhood was.
yeah. No worries, Nevada. Okay, I grew up in Glasgow in the '60s and 19. I was born '64, and so I grew up in a family where a wider family that suffered a lot from alcoholism. My father was an alcoholic. My grandfather was an alcoholic. Well, my grandfather on my mother's side and a few of my uncles were alcoholics, and they were also involved in a lot of petty crime back then. It was like the mid '60s throughout the '70s in Glasgow. There was a lot of social deprivation. They were quite poor. They didn't have any money. Well, they they struggled. They were living in really sort of quite confined condition. Like living like a big family in a small area in a small flat in Glasgow, very working class area. Glasgow was very working class back then anyway, and as a town, as a city, and from a younger age, I sort of looked. I looked because I craved, I think, a lot of validation. Well, I craved just validation from my father because there was a real lack of it at the time because of his alcoholism, not because of anything necessarily that my father struggled with his illness and depression, I think, as well. So not that I think as a man he would want to, because I was his only son, his only child. So I think as a man he probably would want to be really present if he could, but his condition wouldn't allow it really, and he was controlled by it, but controlled by his alcoholism, and as a result of that, I looked and craved his attention, and from a younger age, I started to look outside myself, which which happens with most young people when the sort of childhood part of them is exiled, and these other parts start to come in to manage any sort of pain or emotional disturbance, and in my case, the coping mechanisms were to start to look for validation externally, and I've done that in a number of different ways, and I think that's the roots of really where the addiction really starts to begins really.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think well, you mentioned that your father had alcoholism, struggled with addiction a little bit. Do you think that was stemmed from his role models or his guardians, or?
Yeah, I think I think there's a number of factors with it, and it's difficult to. I mean, no one really know. It's look, everybody. There's lots of sort of scientific studies, twin studies, and is it genetic or is it environmental? And then there's some sort of schools of thought about dopamine production in the brain, that alcoholics and addicts seem to produce less dopamine in the brain, which would have way back from hunter gatherer times would have been a survival threat. So the reward system in the brain, works in a particular way when it finds a dopamine reinforcer such as alcohol, drugs, sex, gambling. It's going to have a problem with it because of the dopamine depletion. So that's one school of thought. I don't necessarily think maybe it's genetic, like as in uh, but they don't really know if there's a gene. They don't really know. They do these twin studies and they see, oh, look, people that have children of alcoholics, 50% of them wind up becoming alcoholics. But we don't know if that's because of the environment, what sort of factors the environment has on it. But I think certainly there's one thing that I see that's quite common in most people with addictions is there's often this often an emotionally absent father, right? And with a lot of the men anyway, for sure, and with the women as well. And there's often a sensitivity that the person who's got the addiction are usually hypersensitive. They've got a heightened sensitivity, and that can be a good thing, like, because you're an empath, you can feel people's pain, you can really understand people's suffering, and you can be there and be very supportive around people. But equally, the oversensitivity means that you can analyze things to death. Basically, you could have two children, and the father could be telling off each of the children, in the same way, but one of the children has got the heightened sensitivity and will take that information and go over it in their head and make it really personal and make it like, oh God, he really hates me, he doesn't like me. Whereas the other child who's not got a heightened sensitivity or that sort of temperament, just it's like water off a duck's back. They don't even think about it. And that sensitivity is when you take drugs or alcohol or whatever the behaviour is. And bear in mind that addiction is not the actual outward manifestation of it, whether it's drink or drugs. That's the symptom. That's not the root cause of it, really. That's just what the person does to manage the uncomfortability or pain, or that. So I think the temperament has got so with I think my father, I think he was an oversensitive. I think his temperament was that. But then if you throw in some childhood adverse experience, like, so if you throw in sort of poverty, alcoholism, maybe in the family, and then you throw in early exposure to drinking. So, where you're drinking maybe when you're 14 or 13, so maybe even pre-puberty by the time so that the temperament, some adverse childhood experiences, maybe some neglect, and early exposure. I think it's like the perfect storm and my father probably had that. And I really look back. I look at and only recently I've really started to understand. Like, I'm 26 years clean and sober now, but I only in the last, say, year I started to really think about his life, and I thought, I wonder instead of having a sort of resentment or blame, I've always tried to be really understanding really about it, but I could probably see now that he just he just didn't have he didn't have the mechanisms to be a good because of this illness, or this, you might call it a disorder as well.
Yeah. And you mentioned the 26 years sober, so congratulations on that.
Thank
And
you.
if we kind of rewind, of course you went through alcoholism as well, and addiction. So what was the kind of the kind of the moment where you drew away from that, where you became clean? What did
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, I when I drew away from it and got clean was just before, actually. So say 1995, I had a sort of rock. I had like several rock bottoms, actually. I had maybe for about 4 years. I had like several um, really like dark, like dark episodes, really, where I thought I should just commit suicide. And the reason I never committed suicide was my ego. My ego was quite like, oh, what would people think if I committed suicide? What would my mum think? What would my stepdad? my father thing. So it's quite interesting how our egos can also, work in favour of, or my sort of, the impression that I would leave. So this night in particular, and I wound up, my friend at the time, back in HIV, back when a lot of people were dying of HIV because there was no combination treatment back then. It was AZT or whatever it was, and I had a friend who was HIV positive, John, his name was, and he used to get, and if you were HIV positive and you were an intravenous drug user, the Home Office here used to, apart from they used to prescribe diamorphine, they would give. So this chap John from St Thomas's Hospital would get this pure heroin, really, in an ampoule form, and it was just because he was HIV positive and he was in a lot of pain, so they gave pure morphine, really. And I was in St Thomas's Hospital with him, and he gave me some free morphine. I was only with them, really, if I'm honest, really, to get the free morphine. I was just like um, strung out or whatever that day, so I'd be so I got. He gave me this hit, gave me the ampoule, I injected it, and I started to go over and go over in the toilet means I started to overdose in the toilet, but not. I didn't overdose. I just blanked out for a period of time. I had overdosed, and I have overdosed. I did, like, several times, maybe, God knows, maybe about 10 or 12 times. The amount of times that I've been close to death is unbelievable, really. I've been stabbed. I've been, all sorts of guns at my head, and foreign countries, and been in foreign prisons, and mad situations with sort of different characters throughout, psychopaths and stuff. But this time anyway, when I came to, I was in this. They turned the light off in the hospital, in the bathroom, and I thought, when I came to, I thought, God, I'm blind, right? But it was just that they turned the light off, and anyway, and then I seen this light at the bottom of the door, because where there was a stream of light coming through. Anyway, I got out the booth for the toilet, and I put the light on, and I had this sort of real rock bottom. Like, I thought, I cannot, and my sort of spirit was crying out and was saying, like, and I didn't, but I sort of believe, I've got sort of mixed beliefs about anything existential, but I'm more agnostic, I think, than anything else. But uh, I was like crying inside me. I thought, I cried out inside for something external. I just thought, if there is a God, like, really, I really need help, like. And anyway, whether that or not, whether that was a factor, or whether that was something that triggered me and reinforced something in me, or whether there was something extra, but quite quickly, in the next, say, few weeks after that, I got arrested. I wound up in Belmarsh, and that was the beginning of the recovery. Like, so when I was in Belmarsh, I cleaned up. But what I also done, because the charge that the conviction that was up for was a more, I could have got a couple of years in prison for it. It was an afraid charge. I wasn't really, so, it was bizarre, really, because I've been, the amount of criminal activity that I used to do, and smuggling and everything else, uh, the things that I should have been caught for, if I did get caught for, would have gave me long prison sentences. But yet I got caught for this. I got convicted of this thing that I wasn't even involved in. I was just happened to be the wrong place at the wrong time with this person. And, so it was just quite crazy, really, that I should get. Anyway, long and short, I wound up in a rehab. And that was the beginning. When I went to the rehab, the there was the beginning of the recovery journey, and equally at the same time as going to that rehab, I met a few people in there was some guys in the rehab who are dead now. Well, one of them's dead now, and who took me along to this event. He took me to this like 12-step music night, and at this 12-step music night, I met this really famous musician, and I had as a kid, I had a poster of him on my wall. This musician, and it was just bizarre. Like I was just in this. It really done something in me. It really changed my attitude towards being clean and sober. Meeting this guy because he was already about 5 years, and he did really difficult. He had really challenging time, and his son had fell out a window in New York, and really tragic stuff. But yet he was sober and clean, and and there was something really powerful about that for me. Like God, you know, and then and then and also I didn't think you could have fun. I didn't think I had real fun at this music night thing. I'd met him. I talked to him. He'd been really, really sweet, encouraging. I'm still in contact with him years and years later. But and yet, yes, that was the beginning of it. Really, the beginning of recovery.
Yeah, and I want to touch on a little bit. You said that obviously you went to Belmarsh and getting involved in, let's say, illegal activity, criminal activity. But just before we go to there, you mentioned that when you thought that you'd been blinded, and when you were at that rock bottom, you were almost crying out for external help, and then you found a bit of, let's say, a community and some role models in that rehab phase. So do you think that is something that's really valuable for people, and maybe something that you were missing at the time? Is this sense of a community, the sense of a role model, basically just external beings, whether it be spiritual or whether it be physical? Is that important for somebody going through what you went through?
Yeah, I think when we're in the addiction, if you think of it, it's like two different worlds. When we're in the addiction, the people that are all in addiction with you are the people that your points of reference and people that you come into contact with, they're all in addiction, and fundamentally we're killing ourselves. It's a self-destructive behaviour that ultimately leads to jails, institutions, and death. Right? It doesn't go anywhere good if you continue down that path. It's death. Even like my Irvin Welsh in Trainspotting, it's like choose life. Choose life. That statement comes from the Bible. I mean, initially from the Bible, I believe. Not that I'm religious now, but it's and what happened to me when I went into the rehab, and when I met individuals like that musician and loads of other people who are all in recovery. I'm choosing life. I get hope because they're exactly the same. They suffer from the same condition as me, which is they've got this illness, disorder, whatever you want to call it, really. But they're taking steps on a daily basis to remain abstinent because they know that one is too many, 1,000 never enough. They can't use anything. They can't use drugs or alcohol successfully. They don't have the capacity because of their personality, because they've got this addictive personality. It's just like the gambler. The gambler can't go and just take one bet. He's going to keep on, it's just going to keep on betting. So it's like, that social, so when you change that social network, and you've got a whole group of people that are trying to be positive and try to deal with their emotional state on a daily basis without taking drugs or alcohol, without medicating, it's incredibly powerful. And it's like being part of a tribe. It's like I'm assuming, like, a friend of mine wrote a book about this actually, and he said that people with addictions actually, they would have been the risk takers in tribes thousands of years ago. People with addictions would have been, because of the sensitivity and because of their thrill-seeking and risk-taking behaviour, they would have been like sort of the watchers of the tribe, and they would have like overseen, because they would have been the sort of mate. And because a lot of people who are addicts, this is the thing, is what people that utilize their addictive, obsessive compulsive behavior, that sort of myopic focus, when they channel that in a productive way, and this is what I see all the time, and I've seen it in myself. If you channel, if I'd been channeled, say I'd get into trading or something, or like done an economics degree when I was young and get into trading, or been into private equity or venture capital or whatever, I'd have been really good. I think I'd have been really good at it, because I'm obsessive by nature. And equally, that guitarist, what makes him a famous guitarist is he'll go over it and over it. Or what makes my friend Russell Brand, who's a comedian, what makes him a great comedian, or is the fact that he'll go over and over his lines. And but it's when the addiction goes into a destructive process, i.e., drugs, alcohol, gambling, could be sex, could be overeating, could be shopping, it could be um, that's when they have a problem. So that, as you're asking me, yeah, like being part of a group, being part of a tribe, a positive tribe, has and the love and connection that you feel within that, and being, I guess then you would say that there's some sort of level of validation within it because you're part of it, rather than being isolated just in your own and just in your own head. When we're isolated, when I'm just in my own head, a lot of the time my head can just create stories, fantasies about myself that are negative. And we say, don't go into your own head. It's like going into a bad neighbor. Don't go in alone. It's like going into a bad neighborhood. It's like, so, and especially in the early days of recovery, having support is really important.
Yeah, and I really like that notion that you touched upon before, the idea of conditions, they can be a force for good as well. You said, had you've got into trading or PE or something like that, the obsessiveness, just as it can be a bit of a kind of lead you to a dark place, it can also maybe be a bit of a superpower. And I think, if people with those conditions kind of understand that and realize that, it could potentially be really, really helpful. But okay, so just moving then, I wanted to touch on the criminality that you were talking
Yeah,
about before,
yeah,
and
yeah.
because I think for me it's interesting to understand whether was that something more to sustain the addiction that you had elsewhere, and kind of like it was a resource so that you could maybe find substances, or was it more a coping mechanism? Like, where do you think that came from? Your kind of
Right, yeah.
your path to criminality, I suppose.
Yeah, I think, right, there's a couple of elements. I think there was a normalization when I was young of crime, right? So shoplifting, even I remember, even as a kid, my dad take me into Woolworths when I was a kid and just saying, "What do you want? What would you like from here?" And I'd say, "Oh, I like that gun." And he'd just put it under his jacket and walk out with it. So I remember as a child, and my dad always had like cars, different cars every couple of weeks. He'd stolen car, like, so there was a sort of a normalization. It was okay to keep. Actually, there was sort of story narratives that like, it's okay to steal, but don't steal from your own kind. You can steal from rich, or you can steal from organisations that have got loads of money. You can certainly steal from banks, right? Bank robbery and all that would be very normal. Like, good luck to them. They deserve it, so that, but we still have that in society to some degree. There's an element of that, hence why all the movies are all about bank robberies, isn't it? It's like people want them to get away. and pull it off. Yeah, anyway, so I think there was that element. There was also money, because I came from scarcity, a position of scarcity. I could see how difficult life was if you don't have money as a child. I thought, I am never going to be poor. I thought, I'd rather die than be poor. Right? This was something that was really ingrained in my head from when I was young. So there was some type of thing where I've got to get money. And then obviously I started using drugs, and I could see that you could multiply, and and I was obsessed with drugs when I first started. I was obsessed with cannabis, with weed. When I first started, there was a book called The Great Books of Hashish, and it was back then. I used to look at night time, I'd look with my torch under my bed. I'd like be looking at these pictures of these countries where it all comes from. Now this is back before skunk and all that. Skunk, like when the whole thing with people doing grows and all that. That's all really in the last 20 years and stuff. But really before that, it was all hash that was coming in from Morocco and Katama and Morocco, or from India, from Himachal Pradesh. So, or Pakistan and stuff, or Afghanistan, but they or Lebanon. But I started to see, there was a part of me was, I really, it was really glamorous to me, and so there was an element of, I really want to use as much drugs as cannabis as possible. I want to go to the sources of where it comes from, and really sit in those fields with the natives who are growing it. I really want to get to the source. Now, that would be driven by just the addiction, just a sort of like the adventure. There's a real adventure. I have a real adventurous spirit anyway, and still have. So there's that sense of adventure, and I guess thrill seeking within that. But also the money would be driven by, if I have lots of money, I can secure, like, I can be autonomous. I don't have to follow the normal rules in society, because I I don't have to work in a conventional job. I don't have to do, because my sort of sense of entitlement would be there. Like, I don't want to go and work 9 to 5 for £100 a day, when I could make £1,000 a day doing this. Do you know what I mean? Like, so there would be that, and also within it all, I was always, from the beginning, always attracted to women, right? And get from a young age, I had a real thing around, and it probably, if I looked at it, really, I always thought, and so I was young when I first started having girlfriends and stuff. I was like, I mean, really, when I think about my kids, like how young, I think, God, I was like 10, 11, where I get obsessions with girls. So there was something about what money could do around securing female relationships, that if I had more money, then I could secure a better caliber of women as well. So that would be in there as well. So there's multiple strands of it.
And there's this sense of ambition that that you're talking about, but also the sense of more, right? And more money, or potentially more girls. Do you think that side of you is, and this might be far-fetched, but do you think that side of you is linked to the addiction? A sense of more.
Oh, completely.
Because again, we're going back to the idea of like a double-edged sword, right? The idea of wanting more and being, and surplus is great with ambition and great with making money, obviously, as long as it's done legally. But also it might play a role in addiction potentially.
Oh, completely, because what you're trying to do, you're trying to fill an emotional unmet need, right? Fundamentally, I think what it is at the core, and that's, you've got to ask yourself, what is that longing? What does the longing long for? What is it? Because no matter how much money, like, I got back then, even at the peak of it, and I'd get like, when we're driving back in cars from Morocco and or from the south of Spain, really up and I'd get through customs, and I'd get a chunk of money, and it'd be like, oh, the elation, the buzz, the thrill, the thing. But it just want more. It'd just be like, and I see it all the time in my client group who are really successful traders. They get like, they'll do a deal and they'll get a couple of million, but then they're like, they're like, when is enough enough? So I think what's at the root of that is this: there's an emotional unmet needs. You're trying to fill a void, an internal void that you feel, that I felt, that vacuum that was meant to be, that maybe when I was young. Look, and I don't know. I could say, oh God, if when I was younger, it's a bit like chasing that, not sounding like a victim at all here. I don't want to come across in this way at all. But say there was a level of love and nurturance that I felt when I was younger, maybe that my developmental dependency needs would have been met, and I'd feel quite secure because I've got an insecure attachment based on that. And I can see that. What happens is that I did look externally to fill that void in with external validation. So I look outside for other boys. When I was growing up, I used to be like a daredevil, so I'd jump off of roofs and I'd do all this stuff to get praise, to get validation. Now that was happening really young. That was happening like when I was 7 or 8, looking for this. And I used to get really high from, I mean, honestly, like before I ever took, I'd get like a buzz from the validation from other people for the other kids, and I'd be like the daredevil or the risk taker. And anyway, if I fast forward with that, I think, oh, all that happened, that just transferred throughout. It's like, oh, I'm still taking these risks. I'm still trying to get this validation, and so there's some part of me that got wired that if I get the external praise, that gives me enough. But that's ego. That's my ego that's getting inflated, rather than my self-esteem, right? Because they're different, and uh, so as long as I could get, but it doesn't last, right? It doesn't last because you've got to keep getting it, right? It's like, I can help an old granny across a road say, I can get, I'll feel good about myself, and I get sort of like a hit from doing something. I'm not saying that I shouldn't do, kind things and, in society, but basically, if I'm continually chasing something outside, because I wake up in the morning, no matter how many old grannies I help across the road, I wake up in the morning with myself again. And so if I've got to keep on chasing, it's quite addictive, that chasing that thing. So it comes from for me, I feel it came from an emotional unmet needs that I was trying to sort of get this validation. And the secret of it is in recovery is like to identify that and go, oh, right, okay, I can give that to myself, that I don't need to be chasing it externally. And when I catch myself chasing it, go, oh, there it goes again. There's this part.
And so now I just want to kind of bring it back to more present day to round up. So you're a counsellor now, and you help those with that addiction issues.
Yeah.
What, I mean, kind of very top line, very general, what do you think it is, or what do you think the best advice would be, first of all, to somebody that has addiction issues and is maybe considering going to see a counsellor, but is kind of one foot in, one foot out, and they're not sure? Is there anything that you kind of advise to them?
Yeah, I think it's really important that people, if they identify that they've got an issue, that they're open. Try and be as open about it. Now not obviously going and seeing a professional. That's like really that's like really good. Somebody who knows, and if they've got, I would say there's quite a lot of addiction therapists that are. That are academic, that they don't have personal experience of addiction, and a lot of them guys can provide good information, but they don't necessarily have any personal experience of addiction. So if they can find somebody who understands, who understands personally about addiction, then it's much more helpful, because that person usually has a deeper level of empathy because they've been there. They've actually been in the same position. So there's something about the therapeutic value of one addict's help and another is without parallel. And what I mean by that is, it's they have a language that they both really understand, without even the person disclosing much about their own addiction. They know. I mean, like, I know that when I went to see professionals who didn't understand, who were purely academic, it didn't work for me, because I was like, well, you don't have a clue really about what I'm suffering from, because you've never experienced it. You're just like, you've went to college and you've got this degree, you've got degrees or whatever it might be. Whereas when I went to see somebody that had personal experience, and especially in sort of 12-step groups and stuff, when you go into those sort of groups where lots of people have their own, and they're not a lot of them are not professionals, they're just people that are staying clean. That can be incredibly powerful. So I'd really encourage that whatever the issue was, whether it be gambling, whether it be sex, there's so many, sex, drugs, alcohol, there's so many different 12-step groups. But there's also not just 12 steps, there's other groups called smart meetings, which are non-12-step, which are like more secular groups. And not that 12 steps is actually, you have to have any belief in a higher power. It doesn't, there's so many atheists and agnostics that go to 12 steps. But I think doing that, and also if you can reach, speak to people and explain to people about what's going on for you, and try and be transparent, because the addiction tries to keep it all secret. It wants you not to disclose. The addictive part doesn't want exposure, really. It wants you to keep in the addiction, and eventually, look, I mean, it's ruthless the way this addiction. We see all the time in the media, like people who die, who are in the public, celebrity status. So you see that continually. We see people that have got, die or have got problems, but or die prematurely. But there's, I mean, it kills. It's a killer, So yeah, definitely.
Amazing. Well, look, thank you so much. I think that's all we've got time for today. But
yeah,
it was honestly a pleasure, and yeah, just such an interesting story. So yeah, just thank you very much for your time.